At 13:47 hours near the muddy corridor between Kostiantan and Nivka, an armored spearhead of 18 Russian vehicles believed they were moving inside a temporary sanctuary carved out by the morning storm. The rain had grounded reconnaissance drones, blinded forward observers, and offered Moscow's forces a narrow window to reposition for the next day's offensive. Yet the battlefield is rarely kind to assumptions. Ukraine's drone teams had been studying the weather radar with the precision of artillerymen, waiting for the exact moment the storm cell fractured. As the first break in the clouds revealed 2 kilometers of unobstructed visibility, the road march that seemed protected minutes earlier transformed into a fully exposed column stretched in single file across open terrain. 24 FPV drones lifted simultaneously, engines screaming through thinning rain, while Russian electronic warfare arrays instantly detected their control links, initiating a lethal counter-battery sequence that forced the Ukrainian teams into a rolling handoff under fire. What followed was a race defined not by kilometers, but by seconds. Seconds before laser-guided shells reached each launch site, seconds before the storm front collapsed the control spectrum, seconds before the BMPT terminators locked onto the incoming swarm. And still the drones pressed forward, threading altitude layers, converging from multiple axes, overwhelming fire control algorithms designed for far fewer simultaneous threats. In the final minute, as Russian vehicles jammed, collided, burned, and crews fled into the sodden fields, the question emerging from the smoke was no longer about the drones themselves, but about the shifting character of modern warfare. If a single break in the clouds can overturn an entire armored assault, so what will decide the advantage on the battlefield in the next confrontations? Let's analyze in this video.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a mission, a deep dive into a stack of sources detailing an extraordinary tactical engagement near Kostiantan to Nivka. It's an engagement that pits small, relatively inexpensive drone technology against some of the most sophisticated armored warfare systems the Russian military can field. Specifically, we're looking at the details of a dramatic FPV, that's first-person view, drone ambush against an 18-vehicle Russian armored column. Now, to set the scene, let's focus on the timeline. The time is 1,347 hours. The column is stretching about 400 meters down a wet road, and they felt secure. Why? Because heavy rain had kept the skies clear of drones all morning. They were rushing to meet a deadline to reach the safety of an abandoned collective farm in just 10 minutes. They thought the weather was their shield. But 3 concealed Ukrainian drone teams were waiting. And the moment the rain stopped, the weather broke faster than anyone expected, instantly turning poor visibility into a 2-kilometer clear line of sight. And this is the core conflict. It's a story of high-stakes timing and incredible tactical discipline, a race not just against the clock and the elements, but ultimately against an algorithm. This is a story about the precise vulnerability of complexity. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, what really stands out immediately is how the environment dictated the entire battle plan. The Russian commander was fundamentally relying on the rain as his active defense. When that defense just vanished, the Ukrainian teams had to be ready for an instantaneous, perfectly synchronized reaction. They couldn't afford even a single minute of delay.
And that speed of response was, as you say, non-negotiable. The moment they got the go-ahead, 24 FPV drones powered up simultaneously across those 3 positions. Our sources even detailed the physical rush of it. The drone motors going from 0 to maximum RPM revolutions per minute in just 2 seconds. They were airborne and climbing fast.
But that acceleration, that immediately triggers the defense. The instant those drones transmitted their first command signal, the Russian SERVS-S5 electronic warfare array locked right onto them. Detection happened in a terrifyingly quick 0.3 seconds.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, why is 0.3 seconds so significant in EW terms?
Well, for listeners trying to visualize this, when a system can detect and classify a threat in less than half a second, it basically removes the human decision cycle entirely. By the time the Russian operator even registers an alert on his screen, the system has already generated preliminary coordinates for counterfire. Those FPV signals are essentially acting like flares in the electromagnetic spectrum.
And the SERVS-S5 is designed to ruthlessly exploit that flare?
Oh, absolutely. It uses precision triangulation. So it's measuring the nanosecond level time difference in the signal arriving at multiple receivers. That tiny difference allowed the system to pinpoint the Ukrainian positions from 8 kilometers away down to an accuracy of 25 meters.
25 meters, that means you're immediately facing guided artillery.
The most dangerous kind. And that puts them in a paralyzing tactical choice. They need altitude to see the column, But our sources talk about this deadly problem of terrain masking.
Explain that. What is terrain masking?
It's just what it sounds like. Signals get blocked by hills, ridges, even buildings. So if the operators fly low, they hide their signal, but they can't see their target.
Hey.
But if they climb up to get that clear video feed, they expose their signal path high above those terrain features. And that gives the EW system a crystal clear lock. It's a classic military trade-off, visibility versus survivability.
That risk of exposure then leads directly to the next threat, the one circling overhead. This wasn't just a ground-based system they were up against.
No, not at all. We have to talk about the Orlan 30 reconnaissance drone. It's circling silently up at 2,000 meters. And this provides the crucial final piece of the Russian sensor-to-shooter loop. It's not just watching with a camera. It's using sophisticated infrared sensors to pick up heat blooms from the operator's equipment. It was actively hunting the human source of the signals, even through thermal blankets.
And this is where the targeting gets truly terrifying. The Orlan 30 has a gimbal-mounted laser designator painting targets with a coded infrared beam.
Exactly. This turns the whole thing into a three-step kill chain. You have the Zoopark M1 counter-battery radar providing the initial firing solution, the rough coordinates. But the Orlan 30 provides the terminal guidance. It keeps that laser spot fixed on the operator's bunker for the entire 30-second flight time of the shell.
That synergy creates a level of surgical precision that it completely changes the game for counter-battery fire, doesn't it?
It does. With this setup, a massive 152mm Krasnopol guided round can hit within 2 meters of a target from 15 kilometers away.
2 meters?
2 meters. For comparison, conventional artillery at that range might scatter over 50 meters. The Krasnopol system transforms the threat from area denial, forcing people to take cover, into a direct targeted assassination of the drone team. So they knew the system had painted their position. They calculated they had, at most, 90 seconds before those shells would hit their earth and timber bunker.
And faced with that, with imminent annihilation, that's where we see the tactical brilliance of the handoffs. Team 1 makes their first critical decision: initiate transfer procedures to the second team while the Krasnopol rounds are already in the air.
And that handoff procedure itself was a huge risk. It shows incredible discipline. The 8 drones from Team 1 had to switch over to GPS Global Positioning System waypoint following. This creates a 3-second vulnerability window. For 3 seconds, those drones are flying blind.
Blind, and at 140 kilometers per hour, that's, over 100 meters of unguided flight?
116 meters, to be exact. If that synchronization fails for any reason, 8 drums just fall out of the sky. The attack is cut by a third before it even begins.
But it worked. The human element here is just critical. The first team is sprinting through wheat stubble with 20-kilogram equipment bags, getting out just 45 seconds before the shells find their bunker.
It shows the technology is only as good as the operator's focus under that kind of extreme pressure.
But the danger just gets passed down the line, and it actually gets worse for Team 2. Now they're controlling 16 drones, which doubles their electromagnetic signature. So the SERV-SS5, which is already listening, it detects that spike and gets an even better lock. Down to 10 meters this time.
Right. And now their own 90-second clock is ticking. The artillery rounds are already walking toward them. The first impacts land 200 meters out, then 150. Close enough to feel the concussion, they realize it's futile to stay. So they initiate the handoff to the third team, but they only take the absolute critical gear, backup tablets, control packs. They leave everything else. Mission continuity over equipment.
An incredibly disciplined move. Which brings us to the central challenge of the entire attack. You now have 24 drones, all controlled by Team 3, converging from 3 different launch sites. It creates this massive air traffic control problem.
At 140 kilometers per hour, any timing error means collision. It means reducing your attack force to, plastic confetti, as one source put it. The whole ambush depended on a choreography they'd practiced for weeks.
And the source material breaks this down beautifully. It details the strict altitude and vector separation. Team 1's drones are at 150 meters from the northwest.
Team 2's are higher, 180 meters from the northeast, and Team 3's are lowest at 120 meters coming in from the south.
And they had a strict 5-second time separation at the 2-kilometer mark. What's amazing is that their video feeds were already degrading to static. They couldn't actually see the other drones. They just had to trust the plan.
Exactly. It's less like warfare and more like high-speed, invisible air traffic control under the most extreme pressure imaginable.
And if that wasn't enough pressure, you have the external threats. There's a storm wall advancing at 30 kilometers an hour, lightning flashes risking an EMP that could scramble their signals. Battery levels are dropping towards 60%. The window is closing fast. They've got maybe 90 seconds left to hit the target. Just one attack run.
And now they finally meet the target, which is defended by the BMPT Terminator. That's Boyovaya Machina Podolsky Tankov. These things were purpose-built for this. Dual 30mm autocannons, automatic grenade launchers, firing 400 rounds a minute with programmable airburst fuses.
So in theory, these two Terminators should have just created an impenetrable dome of shrapnel. They should have swatted these drones out of the sky. This is where we get to the core insight of this entire deep dive. The system's fatal flaw. The Ukrainians had to know this vulnerability existed.
Well, they did. And this is the crucial moment of the analysis. The Terminators are advanced, but their complexity became their Achilles heel. The fire control computer was fundamentally designed using an older Soviet-era algorithm. It was optimized to track a limited number of high-value targets. Think rockets, helicopters, a maximum of 6 at a time.
So what happens when you throw 20 targets at a system designed to handle 6?
It stutters. The best analogy is a librarian trying to shelve books. It can handle 6 at a time. The algorithm prioritizes by size and speed. But all 20 of these incoming FPV drones look identical on its sensors. Same size, same speed. So the computer can't decide which ones to file first. It enters a feedback loop. Instead of firing, it spends critical milliseconds constantly recalculating, reshuffling the target queue, reevaluating.
So it freezes, it paralyzes its own ability to respond.
Precisely. And the attack was choreographed to exploit that. The drones came in from 185-degree angles the turret couldn't cover simultaneously, forcing the system to constantly choose and re-choose. They overloaded its decision-making capacity until it effectively failed. Speed and volume beat complexity.
Even against the fire they did manage to put up, 3 drones were lost, but 20 survived. Which brings us to the endgame, the surgical strike.
And these were not random hits. This final dive was all about focus, aiming exclusively at known weak points. They targeted the gap between the turret and the hull, engine deck grills, vision blocks, and, critically, the gaps in the improvised cage armor that's meant to defeat these things.
And the success was just stunning. The sources highlight how surgical the hits were. One drone gets through a gap, hits the turret ring of a T-72 and jams the turret. Another hits the open rear door of a BMP and kills the engine. Even the Terminators took hits to their optical systems and engine intakes, neutralizing them.
The outcome was swift. Within 90 seconds of the first impact, 12 vehicles were immobilized or burning. The crews knew it was over and abandoned them. 3 vehicles that tried to escape off-road just got bogged down in the mud.
And the last 4 drones, they just circled, conducting a final methodical neutralization run to make sure nothing was salvageable before they left. A stunning display.
You know, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this wasn't just a successful skirmish. It was a victory of coordination, of discipline, and of an intimate knowledge of the adversary's automated systems. The low cost and mass saturation of FPV drones effectively defeated purpose-built, very expensive counter-drone armor.
What this deep dive really shows you, I think, is that in modern conflict, the speed of information processing and the exploitation of these fixed algorithms are just as crucial as the size of your gun. The ability to overload a complex automated system is a weapon in itself.
Absolutely. The Ukrainians didn't need a bigger weapon. They needed a faster, more numerous attack that maximized the decision load on the opposing computer until that system crashed under its own complexity.
Which raises an important question for you to consider. When complex automated defense systems rely on fixed algorithms, on fixed ways of thinking, how will militaries adapt to maintain defense integrity against tactics designed specifically to overload that system, knowing that speed and volume can beat complexity every single time? That's something for you to mull over.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Deep Dive. This is where we cut through the noise of geopolitical turbulence, we look at the source material, and we get right to the heart of what's actually changing under the surface. It's a complex world out there, and our mission, as always, is to give you that crucial context. And to give it to you quickly, today we are deep diving into something that, well, it fundamentally rewrites the strategic map of the Ukraine conflict. And it all centers on one country, Turkey. For years, Vladimir Putin has, operated under this assumption that Ankara, while a North Atlantic Treaty Organization member, would always play a special role, a sort of friendly buffer in the alliance. Our sources suggest that assumption hasn't just been challenged, it's been completely obliterated. We're looking at the documents that detail how Turkey went from being a critical go-between, the nation that unlocked the grain deal, for instance, to now preparing to put Turkish boots on Ukrainian soil. a direct military guarantor, alongside some very powerful Western allies. The question we're unpacking for you is really, how did this happen? How did this profound shift, which amounts to a strategic disaster for the Kremlin, actually unfold? And the first sign, the first real tremor, it wasn't military, it wasn't even diplomatic, it was about oil. Russia's reliance on Turkey as a key logistics hub to get around Western sanctions just dried up.
It really did. Turkey slashed its imports of Russian Urals crude by a full third, just in November compared to October.
That's a huge drop.
It's massive. And you have to understand, Urals crude is Russia's main export blend. Turkey wasn't just buying it for itself, it was this critical waypoint, a place to manage the flow onto the global market. So when you cut shipments from, say, 300,000 barrels a day down to 200,000, that's not just a dip in trade.
It's a signal.
It's a very loud signal. It's Turkey showing it's willing to disrupt the Kremlin's most essential logistical chains, the very chains it needs to generate revenue. But, this wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the result of a lot of friction building up.
Okay, so let's unpack that friction, because our sources point to this classic tit for tat, this back and forth that shows how quickly things can escalate. Where did it really start on the Black Sea?
Well, it seems to have started with Russia testing Turkey's patience. The sources point right to an incident with the ferry, the sea bridge.
The sea bridge.
Right.
This was supposed to be a good thing, wasn't it? Reopening a route after 14 years.
Exactly. It was meant to be a symbol of cooperation, of good bilateral relations. But when the ferry got to Sochi, Russian authorities just held it for days out in the open sea. They gave these vague reasons, naval drills, some missing paperwork.
The usual runaround.
The usual runaround, yes. And eventually, they just forced it to turn around and go back to Trabzon. Never even let it dock. In Ankara, this was seen as a deliberate, calculated humiliation. A message.
And Turkey is not a nation that takes humiliation lightly, especially concerning its sovereignty.
Not at all. Moscow made a classic mistake. They forgot that Turkey holds the ultimate trump card in the region control of the Black Sea Straits, and Turkey's response was, well, it was swift and, frankly, much harsher.
So a Russian cruise ship, the Torre Grande, sails towards Istanbul.
With hundreds of tourists on board, yes.
Yeah.
And it just hits a brick wall of Turkish bureaucracy. It was kept circling the Marmara Sea for hours.
A little payback.
More than a little. The same delaying tactics, the same hurdles the sea bridge faced. You have hundreds of Russian tourists who can see the skyline of Istanbul but can't get there. It was Turkey reminding Russia exactly who controls the gateway to the Black Sea.
So from diplomatic spats to something much more serious, the war itself is now literally on Turkey's doorstep, isn't it?
It is. And this is where the strategic pivot really happens. The whole situation became untenable for Turkey, and it's all because of Russia's uninsured shadow fleet.
These are the old, barely functional tankers Russia's using to evade sanctions.
Exactly. They're floating environmental bombs, and that risk became terrifyingly real. The Ukrainian Security Service, the SBU, has been hitting these ships with naval drones, and two of them, the Kros and the Virat, they were hit just 28 and 35 nautical miles off the Turkish coast.
That's practically in Istanbul's backyard.
It is. I mean, you're almost in visual range. So if Russia can't even protect its own ships in what it claims are its own waters, it certainly can't guarantee security for the whole region.
Which is Turkey's #1 concern.
Correct. Turkey's own Minister of Transport had to come out and confirm external interference right off their coast. For President Erdogan, this was the final alarm bell. The war had arrived.
So the risk of an oil spill, block trade, just pure chaos, it forced Ankara's hand.
It did. Turkey, as the region's biggest naval power, decided it could no longer just react. It had to step in. The decision to send troops is framed as a move to impose order at the source of the chaos, which is the war itself.
Which brings us to this multinational force, the plan laid out by French President Emmanuel Macron. This is where Turkey's shift becomes part of a new, formal European security plan.
It is. Macron announced this new architecture, and it's called the Second Line of Defense. The idea is that right after a ceasefire, a security force deploys on Ukrainian soil.
And the coalition behind it is incredibly significant.
Very. You have France, the United Kingdom, and Turkey, two nuclear powers and the dominant regional naval power.
And their mission isn't to fight, right? It's about deterrence.
That's the crucial distinction. They won't be in the hot zones in the Donbas. Their one job is to protect Ukraine's strategic depth. We're talking about vital centers like Kyiv, Lviv, and especially the port of Odessa. Their very presence is meant to make a future invasion politically impossible for Russia.
So the calculation for Moscow completely changes. An attack on Odessa isn't just an attack on Ukraine anymore.
An attack on Odessa means you are physically engaging with soldiers from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's strongest members. It's a profound strategic deterrent. And it leads us right into the high-level power analysis here.
Right, let's dig into that for you, because this isn't just about troops. This is a fundamental strategic defeat for Russia. It just dismantles decades of their foreign policy.
Absolutely. The single biggest thing is that it publicly shatters Russia's near-abroad doctrine. For decades, that has been the foundation of their thinking, this idea that Moscow has a special sphere of influence over former Soviet states.
And that no outside military, especially the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, can set up shop there.
Precisely. That was the ultimate red line. And now you have France, the UK, and Turkey not just crossing that line, but setting up bases and observation points directly on it. They're completely neutralizing the doctrine.
And Russia is too bogged down in Ukraine to really do anything about it conventionally.
They are, which immediately changes Turkey's role. They go from being a mediator, setting the table for talks, to a guarantor of Ukraine's future. And a guarantor Turkey with troops on the ground that blocks any future Russian dream of reoccupying Ukraine. It's the Kremlin's greatest fear realized.
And it builds on the power they already have with the Montreux Convention, doesn't it?
Perfectly. With Montreux, they control naval access, basically trapping the Russian Navy. Now they're turning that defensive power into a proactive ground strategy. It's a strategic checkmate. And our sources say Moscow is being forced to just accept it. Their options are exhausted.
So let's talk about the other two members of this coalition, France and the United Kingdom. Why are they so critical here? Why should their presence be genuinely frightening for the Kremlin?
It's the nuclear equation. It's that simple. They are Europe's only independent nuclear powers. Their troops on the ground aren't just soldiers, they are a strategic tripwire.
So those French and British boots come with the backing of the nuclear arsenals in Paris and London?
That is the core logic. The deterrence is brutal. If Putin strikes a base protected by British or French forces, he's not just facing a conventional response, he's facing a North Atlantic Treaty Organization force with its own sovereign nuclear capability. It creates physical no-go zones.
And there's another layer of brilliance to this. It acts as a massive force multiplier for Ukraine, doesn't it? Even if those troops never fire a shot.
It's a stunningly effective move. Think about the geography. This force is expected to deploy along the right bank of the Dnieper River and, crucially, along the Belarusian border.
A northern invasion, right?
Right. And right now, Ukraine has to keep tens of thousands of its best brigades sitting in trenches there, just in case. They're defensive insurance.
But if French, British, and Turkish troops take over that security role,
then all of those elite Ukrainian soldiers are immediately freed up. This huge, fresh, well-equipped force can now flow directly to the Eastern Front, to the Donbas, where Russia's forces are stretched thin. You are effectively doubling the Ukrainian army's combat power without a single shot being fired. That is what's causing the panic in the Kremlin.
So after having a small ferry turned away from Sochi, Erdogan has responded by basically raising the Turkish flag in Ukraine's most critical cities. It's an incredible strategic turnaround.
It's one of the most asymmetric diplomatic responses I've seen. Russia thought it was making a small tactical point, and in response, it now faces the permanent reality of Turkish troops anchoring the security of Kiev and Odessa. The game has changed. The future of the Black Sea is now being written in Ankara, not Moscow.
History books might really look back at 2025 as the year the West stopped just sending weapons and instead said, with soldiers on the ground, we are here.
And it shows that Putin's nuclear blackmail, well, it seems to have reached its limit when faced with other nuclear powers in a clear defensive posture.
So before we finish this deep dive, here is the final provocative thought for you to take away. If Russia is being forced to accept Turkey's new role because its own military is exhausted, what are the long-term implications for Vladimir Putin's stability at home, when his most sacred foreign policy doctrine, the near abroad, is so publicly and permanently defined? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into power analysis. Reflect on the footsteps of this new era. We'll see you next time.